Hey everyone, and welcome back to Boss Economic World. The only place that puts the global economy on the therapy couch to figure out its deep-seated issues. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a heated argument, maybe with a significant other, and you pull out that one thing you promised you'd never bring up again? You know, that nuclear option? Well, it turns out the President of the United States has an entire arsenal of economic nuclear options, and he's been launching them like it's the 4th of July. But today, November 6, 2025, the game has changed. The one person who can tell the president to sit down and be quiet, well, okay, 9 people are finally weighing in. The Supreme Court just spent 2.5 hours listening to arguments about whether President Trump's favorite tariff-imposing superpower is actually legal. The whole world is holding its breath. Businesses are popping antacids like they're candy. And we're here to break down what's really going on, why it's a much bigger deal than just a few taxes on imported widgets, and why, no matter what happens, you should probably buckle up. This roller coaster is just getting started. Alright, let's get into the weeds. The central issue here is a dusty old law from 1977 called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Now, IEEPA was designed for real, Hollywood-style emergencies. Think dealing with rogue nations, freezing terrorist assets, or responding to an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. It gives the president broad, fast-acting powers. It's the economic equivalent of a break glass in case of emergency box. The Trump administration, in its infinite creativity, looked at this law and thought, you know what's an unusual and extraordinary threat? The price of Chinese-made garden gnomes. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. They've been using IEEPA to slap tariffs on dozens of countries, arguing that a trade imbalance constitutes a national emergency. This is what had the Supreme Court justices, including key conservatives, raising their eyebrows yesterday. They were basically asking the government's lawyers, so, you're saying the president can declare a price emergency and tax anything from anywhere, anytime he wants, with no say from Congress? It's like using a fire extinguisher to water your plants. Sure, it gets them wet, but it makes a huge mess and it's not what the tool was designed for. The White House, of course, is playing it cool. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the president is optimistic. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, after attending the hearing, told Fox Business he was very, very optimistic. This is the political equivalent of walking away from a car crash and saying, don't worry, I meant to do that. They have to project confidence, because admitting your entire economic strategy might be unconstitutional is, well, it's not a good look. So, why does this one court case matter so much? Because President Trump loves tariffs. They are his Swiss Army knife for foreign policy. Need to pressure China in negotiations? Tariffs. EU being difficult about agricultural standards? Tariffs. A country's leader looks at him funny? Probably tariffs. If the Supreme Court takes away his favorite toy, IEEPA, does that mean the trade wars are over? Absolutely not. And this is the part where it gets complicated, and frankly, a bit crazy. Think of the president's tariff powers as a multi-headed hydra. You cut off one head, and 2 more grow in its place. Trade lawyers are already pointing to a whole cabinet of other, older, and dustier laws he can use. Section 301, this is the "you're cheating" lever. It was used extensively in his first term against China for intellectual property theft. It's more targeted, requires an investigation, but it's still a powerful tool. Section 232, this is the national security hammer. It lets the president impose tariffs on goods deemed critical to national defense. This is how we got the steel and aluminum tariffs. The definition of national security has been stretched to include everything from cars to, I kid you not, concerns over future imports of robots and pharmaceuticals. Are imported travel pillows a threat to the nation's strategic readiness? The Pentagon has yet to comment, but don't be surprised if that's the next argument. Section 122 and Section 338, these are the vintage, found in Grandpa's attic laws. Section 122 allows for a 15% tariff for 150 days to deal with a balance of payments crisis. Section 338, which dates back to the infamous Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, has never been used. It allows for tariffs against countries that discriminate against American goods. It's so powerful and vague that it's been called the Godzilla of trade law. Blake Hardin, a top trade policy advisor at EY, put it perfectly, uncertainty is the name of the game right now. This uncertainty ripples through everything. Big geopolitical negotiations with the EU, Brazil, and India? They're all paused, waiting to see which weapon Trump will be allowed to wield. The new trade deals being hammered out with South Korea and Vietnam? They're built on a foundation of sand, because the tariff pressure used to get them to the table might be ruled illegal. As Josh Lipsky from the Atlantic Council said, a ruling against Trump would undercut the core of not just the president's international economic agenda, but also, a lot of his foreign policy agenda. It's like taking away a chef's favorite ingredient. He can still cook, but the entire menu is about to change. Now, let's talk about the 800-pound panda in the room, China. The recent trade truce that Secretary Bessent helped broker was hailed as a major breakthrough. But it's fragile. It's like 2 boxers agreeing to stop punching each other for a round, but they're still in the ring, staring each other down. So, if the Supreme Court kneecaps Trump's tariffs, does China pop the champagne? Not so fast. First, as we discussed, Team Trump will likely just switch to another legal authority, probably Section 301, to keep the pressure on. It might be a tactical, temporary win for Beijing, but the strategic conflict remains. Second, and this is the most important part, tariffs are becoming the old-school battleground. The real 21st century economic war is being fought over technology and supply chains. The US has been tightening its chokehold on advanced semiconductors, using export controls to block China's access to the high-end chips needed for AI and supercomputing. This is a surgical strike, far more damaging than a broad tariff. China, in response, is flexing its own muscles. It dominates the world's supply of rare earth minerals, the essential ingredients for everything from iPhones and electric vehicles to F-35 fighter jets. They've already used this dominance to cause pain, as they say, for the US and its allies. So, while everyone is watching the tariff drama, the real fight is a technological Cold War. The meetings between President Trump and President Xi next year won't just be about soybeans and steel, they'll be about who controls the building blocks of the future economy. And here's the kicker, if the US does impose new tariffs under a different law, China could see it as a violation of the truce, sending the entire relationship right back into a nosedive. It's a geopolitical Jenga tower, and the Supreme Court is about to pull out a very large block. Alright, enough about geopolitics and legal jargon. What does this mean for real people and real businesses? Let's talk to Travis McMaster, general manager of a company called Cocoon in Washington State. They import things like sleeping bag liners and travel pillows. He's stuck. He told us, "We've seen the resolve of this president. He's holding back on going to trade shows, which is how he finds new business. He's cutting his product line. He's in a holding pattern, burning fuel but going nowhere." Or let's go to California and talk to Nicole McDonald. She invented a cool 10-pocket sash bag and founded her company, Sash Group, 13 years ago. She has a shipment of beautiful leather bags produced in India just sitting there, collecting dust. Why? Because she can't afford the staggering $575,000 in tariffs to import them. Think about that. That's not a business expense, that's a death sentence for a small company. So what does she do? She's had to scramble to make non-leather versions in China, because even with all the China tariffs, it's still cheaper than paying the new IEEPA-based duties on Indian goods. She's already raised her prices twice this year and had to lay off 7 of her 12 employees. She told us, "We're not dead in the water yet, but my fear is that by the time something happens, it might be too late." This is the untold story of the trade wars. It's not just numbers on a government spreadsheet. It's entrepreneurs watching their life's work crumble because of a policy memo written 2,000 miles away. It's employees losing their jobs. It's you, the consumer, paying higher prices for everything from your handbag to your camping gear. And let's look at the big picture numbers from Bloomberg Economics. They ran the models. Scenario 1, tariffs are preserved. The hit to US GDP is about 1.7%. On our $28 trillion economy, that's a $476 billion blow. That's more than the entire GDP of countries like Austria or Israel. Scenario 2, the Supreme Court rules broadly against Trump. The average tariff rate falls, and the hit to GDP is reduced to 0.6%. That's a difference of over $300 billion. That's not even counting the possibility of refunds. If the court orders the government to refund all the tariffs collected illegally under IEEPA, we are talking about tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars. Customs broker Cindy Allen called it a massive project. And get this, with the recent government shutdown drama, many customs and border protection agents haven't been paid in over a month. Now imagine telling these unpaid, overworked agents they have to process billions of dollars in refunds. It's an administrative nightmare waiting to happen. So, where does this leave us? Secretary Bessent has been on a bit of a tour, saying on one hand that losing the tariff revenue would be terrible for the budget, and on the other hand saying it's all extra and won't have a big impact. Which is it, Scott? The truth is, the tariff revenue has helped narrow the budget deficit slightly, bringing it down to $1.78 trillion this year. But let's be real. That's like using a teaspoon to bail out the Titanic. Especially when the government is also passing massive new tax cuts that will shrink its overall revenue. As analyst Rachel Ziemba said, the deficit would be even wider if they weren't generating revenue through this channel. It's a fiscal sugar high, not a long-term solution. At the end of the day, no matter how the Supreme Court rules, the era of stable, predictable trade is over. We have entered a new age of economic statecraft where any law can be a weapon, any supply chain a vulnerability, and any business a potential casualty. A ruling against the president might offer a temporary reprieve for folks like Nicole and Travis. It might force the administration to be a little more creative. But it won't change the fundamental America First ideology that sees international trade as a zero-sum game. The real winners in all this? The trade lawyers and consultants, who are charging a fortune to help companies navigate this mess. The real losers? Small businesses that don't have a team of lawyers, and consumers who ultimately foot the bill. So, as we wait for the Supremes to render their verdict, remember this: the rules of the game have been permanently rewritten. The only certainty is more uncertainty. That's all the time we have for today. Stay informed, and remember that when it comes to the economy, the headline is never the whole story. I'll see you next time on Boss Economic World.